Hello and welcome. My name is Sam, and thank you for joining me as we dive into the latest installment in my all-time favorite book series. I have been a massive fan of the Hunger Games and all related media since I was about 14. I read the trilogy my freshman year of high school and just fell in love. Since then, I've read the Hunger Games probably about a dozen times. Catching Fire and Mockingjay a few fewer times, and then I've only read Ballad once. They're all on my list to be reread, but I did want to kind of get some more of my raw, unedited thoughts about the newest book, Sunrise on the Reaping, out before I do that reread and before I dive totally and completely back into that universe. So what we'll do here is I'll have a shorter, spoiler-free section just going over my general thoughts, some of my thoughts on the series as a whole, some of the themes and different things and my rating, how well I feel like it was accomplished, and then I'll dive into some probably incoherent spoiler ramblings. Without further ado, let's get into that. I feel like I need to preface my review for Sunrise on the Reaping by stating that this is not a book that I wanted. I've been a huge fan of the Hunger Games for most of my life, actually. I think we're more than halfway. Wow. And this story, Haymitch's Hunger Games, along with Finnick's games and Joanna's games, I think are the most requested stories out of the entire fandom. People have been clamoring for these ones for literal years. And I was never on board with that. I never wanted it. I thought that what we got in Catching Fire was sufficient, that we knew how his games went. There wasn't much more that needed to be said on the subject, and any attempts at doing so would just be fan service. So it was never something that I wanted. I, as a person, also am just very generally hesitant and distrusting of any franchises being resurrected and brought back, especially in today's media landscape where nothing is too well regarded, nothing is too sacred for a quick cash grab. And actually, back in 2019, when it was originally announced that there would be a new book in the Hunger Games series, I was quite nervous then as well. And it wasn't until we got that first look at it, that it would be the 10th Hunger Games, that it would be following a young President Snow, that I kind of looked at that and realized that this is not the story that you tell if you're looking to do a nostalgia bait cash grab. And I ended up being extremely satisfied with how that story turned out. But then give it another 4 years and oh, look at that, there's another one. And this time it is Haymitch. This is the story that you tell if you're looking for a quick nostalgia grab. And it actually ended up not being that, at least for me. If you are someone who is incredibly sensitive to that, where having characters show up that maybe you don't feel like they should be there, or having references backwards or forwards to previous books, if you're incredibly sensitive to that, there is enough here that you probably won't enjoy it and you could write it off as nostalgia bait, but that's not actually ultimately where I ended up. Overall, this book probably does rank last in the Hunger Games series for me, but just because I love the other four so much. I do need to reread it already. I feel like I rushed through it a little bit just because I was trying to take it all in, but then I wanted to know what was new and what was different and what did they change and what did so I need to reread it, and I'm probably also going to reread the entire rest of the series. And you'll probably see a lot of Hunger Games fangirling from me in the months ahead. Overall, I would give this probably a high 4 stars, probably 4.5. It's not quite the perfect installment that I've come to expect from the series, but it also wasn't a disappointment. I enjoyed being in Haymitch's head. I enjoyed the discussions on propaganda, on implicit submission, on the rule of the few over the many. One thing that has always impressed me about Suzanne Collins is I believe her father was a political science professor. So when she talks about politics, it's actual political theory, which many authors don't understand. So I have always appreciated the series for diving into some of that, for putting these theories to the test, for placing them in a fictional world where we can explore them. And this book is no different on that regard, if perhaps a little more heavy-handed, a little less subtle. But again, the reread will help with that. So overall, I did really enjoy this book, and I would absolutely recommend it as a worthy entry in this series. If you are waiting to pick it up, just waiting to see if it is just a heartless nostalgia cash grab, I would say give it a shot. Again, though, if you are really, really sensitive and over that sort of thing, then this may also push some buttons, but I think it's worth it. And now we'll get into some of my spoiler thoughts. Just a little bit raw, mostly unedited, off script. If you haven't read the book, I would probably turn this off now, but thank you, and come back when you have. Now, on to my spoilery thoughts. First thing, I love how this book sort of acts as a bridge between the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and the trilogy. Just answering some questions, just kind of acting as that step in between them. We get to see sort of what becomes of the rest of the covey. Eventually, we end up with just Clerk Carmine and Mockingjay as a lone fiddler who doesn't even have his name. But we get to see Hamish in his story. Finally, we get to see Katniss's parents, both of them, and Peeta's father, get names for all of them too. That's pretty cool. Fandom has been bugging Suzanne Collins for that for a decade and a half. One trap that I kind of fell into that is touched on a fair amount in this book is the control and the power that comes from controlling the narrative, of being able to edit the footage the way that you want to tell the story that you want, even if that is so far off of the actual truth. And I remember saying rather often that we didn't need Hamish's book because we already knew what happened in Hamish's games. I was kind of eating those words by the end of this, which is fine, and it does really show just how vulnerable the narrative is if the wrong people are in control of it. From Hamish's own reaping being a total cover-up to them actually just replacing a tribute, they cut out so much of what actually happened. And like Katniss and Peeta, when they are watching this tape and Catching the Fire, I just took it for the truth. So that's kind of a neat little object lesson or demonstration of you think you know what happened, but here's what actually happened. So I did like that. This whole series is about propaganda. It's about what message that you want to send out, and it's about who controls that message. And I'll get into that another time. But I do very much like that that was continued here and even brought more into the spotlight here. As for Hamish himself, ouch, he grew up relatively normal. He lost his father at a young age, but he had a very steady and normal and present parent with his mother, and he had his younger brother and his girlfriend. He was honestly just living about as normal of a life as you could in District 12. Until all of this goes down. He's rather quite the contrast to both Snow and Katniss in that way. It is very much the games and then the aftermath of the games that break him. The games themselves are absolutely horrific. I was talking about this with a friend, but I don't know how Suzanne Collins manages it, but she has been making the child murder games more and more horrific with every single book. Like, we start out with the trilogy with, this is objectively horrific, but we're kind of right in the middle of it, and there's enough spectacle to cover it up. There's enough familiarity with our own game shows and our own reality TV that we can be like, well, it is what it is. And then you get to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and you strip away all of that spectacle, and then it's not fun, which was never supposed to be fun, but it's really, really not. And then we get to this book, and it's a weird mix of the two, and then it's even more horrific. I don't know if I'll ever actually properly get over Ampert or Luella or Lulu or Macely at that point. This book was genuinely quite upsetting. And not for any of the reasons that I thought it would be. Let's touch a little bit on what some people are decrying as nostalgia baiting, and some of it does feel a little over the top, but we learn Katniss's parents' names. We see both of them. That makes sense. They're the same age as Hamish. I'd be surprised if he didn't know them. Same with Peeta's father. Again, they're all in the same age. They're probably all in the same class at school. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know lots and lots of people. Plutarch not really pushing it. Like, we knew that he had been involved in the games for a very, very long time. He eventually worked his way up to head game maker by catching fire, which is where he does most of his damage. But it is interesting to see him more starting out new and to find out that he was always part of the rebellion, that he was always plotting this, that he was never really happy with the way that the Capitol did things. That's very interesting. And then the introduction of Effie as, District 12 step-in stylist and then later escort. It's one of those that it feels weird when she first shows up and you're like, why are you here? And then it makes more sense. So I'm okay with that. Nags and Wireless were a little bit too much. And again, there are only so many victors. There are only so many victors who might be willing to mentor another district other than their own. So yeah, no, we're okay. We're okay. It would have been nice to get to know some other different characters, but, they all play their parts well. They all work. Now to get into a little bit of what I really, really love. Haymitch as a character. So much of who he is and what he does in the trilogy is just very, very tragic. And then we get this entire book and we just learn that it's way, way more tragic than we ever could have thought. We had a line early on where Haymitch is thinking that he doesn't drink. And you just know what this poor boy is going to be put through, and you just know where he ends up, and it's just very sad. We know from lines that he has in Mockingjay that his family, everyone he ever cared about, and his girl were all killed 2 weeks after he was crowned victor. So you know that it's coming, and it's one of those weird things where you know most of the pieces, but you don't know how they fit together. You don't know how it actually happens. And I don't usually like stories like that. I don't usually enjoy having big moments like that spoiled for me, or spoiled in quotations. Because if I already know where a character is going to end up or how things are going to turn out, it does kind of interfere with my ability to really, truly dive deeply into the story and really care about them. But it worked here. I didn't quite grasp onto Haymitch and Lenore Dove the way that I have with other romances in this series, but just seeing how young and open and carefree and loving that he was, even more of a tragedy. I also really loved Haymitch's relationships and eventual friendships with his fellow tributes, even if it was very sad. Short-lived as they were, Wyatt was a good character. I was actually quite upset when he perished in the initial cornucopia bloodbath, and the star of that was definitely Macely. I realized about halfway through the book that, from Catching Fire, that they end up being allies, that he holds her as she dies. But I realized about halfway through the book that Haymitch is going to have to go back after this and see her twin sister, identical twin sister, and eventually see her niece, who by most accounts looks just like the both of them as well. So that kind of broke me a little bit. I also really enjoyed the music and the poetry. One thing that I've noticed that Suzanne Collins has been doing with these prequels is really ramping up how much music there is. I like to think that it's because the movie adaptations missed so much of it that they cut out almost everything. I think there's a little bit in the first movie, and then we get the hanging tree and all of those remixes. But I like to think that she included so much more and made it so narratively important that you couldn't miss that again, which just gives me a little bit of a chuckle. I also really enjoy how the spirit of Lucy Gray lives on. I do think that she didn't make it out of those woods. I like very much that we still don't have a definitive answer to that. I like the mystery, I like the debate, and I like that that wasn't answered here. But I like how her music and her rebellious spirit lives on in Lenore Dove. I like how she continues to haunt Snow. We all inferred that that was happening in the trilogy, he was seeing Katniss out there singing these songs, wearing that Mockingjay pin, being the Mockingjay, and just forcing him to relive every mistake he made. But it's very nice to have that confirmation that he is the pettiest man in the world, unable to get over or let go of anything. and that he is still actively thinking about her 40 years later. Probably one of my favorite lines of the entire book is him just, I don't know, trauma dumping all over Haymitch and telling him that dying in the Hunger Games is preferable to dating a cubby girl. Lastly, I think I'd be kind of remiss if I didn't touch on the epilogue, if I didn't tie this back to the trilogy that I love. We get our first new glimpse at Katniss and Peeta in what has it been, 15 years? And Katniss is just her hard to love, awkward self. And then Peeta's just his usual lovable self. We get a little bit post Mockingjay. I think this falls right towards the end where Katniss is talking about them creating the memory book, and then Haymitch contributes his own stories of the people that he has known and loved and lost. And then Katniss gifts him with a basket of goose eggs, which is, let me tell you, when I remembered about halfway through the story that Haymitch does in fact tend geese after Mockingjay, like it was over for me. Like there's no coming back from that. I feel like with the geese, with Lenore Dove, with all of the symbolism of how they mate for life and how important all of this is, it really does just hammer home how important love is to the Hunger Games universe. It is also very much about love. That's very much the framework of the entire series. Now, I think those are all of my thoughts for now. I'll be back with you guys after I've reread the book and then reread the entire series, and then we'll get into a much, much deeper dive into all of it. But thank you so much for watching this far. I hope you have a wonderful day. Like if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more reviews, more analysis. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.